Hello everyone, thank you for inviting me to the Warwick Festival this year. I'm very pleased to be with you, even though it's virtually. I'm very fond of Warwick. I lived there for 8 years and was quite involved with the Warwick Festival, as it was in those days mostly a music festival. And then of course it became Warwick Words and then Warwick History, and I really admire the way Helen has managed to keep it going in this difficult time when a lot of festivals are just falling by the wayside. I really admire what you're doing, Helen. I'd also like to thank Andy McKinnon, who's the director of Uist Film, who has made my appearance possible today. We are in the Arts Centre at Tykersever on North Uist, and although I'm sure many of you know where North Uist is, just for those of you who don't know, if you'd like to pretend that I'm the British Isles and that from here upwards is Scotland and my hand is Skye on the west coast of Scotland, and then 30 miles out in the Atlantic there's a chain of islands called the Outer Hebrides, Lewis, Harris, then the Sound of Harris where you have to get a ferry, then North Uist where we are now, then Benbecula, South Uist, Eriskay and right down to Barra. So that just puts you, gives you a little idea of where we are. Arriving at the sea, it is as if, until this moment, we have held our breath tight in our chests, and only now dare to let go. As if in towns and cities we are not free, and only the sea releases us. Secretly, we are all in love with the sea. And it was the sea that actually brought me to live on North Uist. Up until that time, I had only ever written poems about women, the juggling lives that we lead. And when I came here, I didn't ever think that I would write about the landscape, but slowly it sort of seeped into my writing. And I have written several books of poems about the sea. And my latest collection, which is called Written on the Shore, actually brings women and the sea together. It's a sequence of poems which was originally just scribbled in my notebook when I went down to the beach, and I would sit in the dunes and just scribble away. I would be walking on my favourite Solace beach, or Trier as it's called. It's about 1.75 miles long, of silver shell sand. And there's hardly ever anybody else there. And I think deserted shores are a great place for meditation, for standing and staring, for thinking about people who matter to you. The sea can bring great joy, but also sadness and longing. And although these poems do tell you quite a lot about the beach, they are more to do with relationships and ideas that I have when I'm walking there. The first poem is a little bit strange. It's about a woman standing at the edge of the sea, and it says that her lips are parted and they're slightly rubbed out, like those murals that you see in churches where parts of it's exposed and some of it's already been rubbed out. And I'm using that really as a metaphor for saying that maybe this woman isn't able to say everything she would like to say. It's called Poised. Poised here like an angel painted on a sacred wall, her parted lips half rubbed out, staring at the sea's ebb and flow of stained glass without the sun's illumination. In a grey coat, which should have been silk, but choosing wool for the warmth it doesn't quite give. Looking back over her shoulder, hoping to catch a glimpse of something out of reach. Whenever you go down to the shore, it's always different, particularly the surface of the beach. And this is just my attempt to describe how it was on one particular day. Shore, wet, dry, dry, wet patchwork, smooth, silk smooth, rough, crusted rough, wave shapes, tiny ridged ridges, shells standing proud, braving the wind, grey peat patterns surfacing like dead trees, and a navy blue sea, bottle green in the waves' lift, surfs its slow roar, its slow hush of white, leaves fine writing at the edge. Sometimes when I'm there, although mostly I'm very happy to be there on my own, I think it would be nice to have somebody special with me. Are you busy just now? Or are you thinking to walk the Half Moon Bay across low dunes down onto Solace Beach? Are you thinking it's a perfect day of calm before the threatened storm? Smooth sand for miles with no one else in sight. Are you thinking pebbles overlapping, scrunched together, separate, with the tide ebbing and low hills disappearing in this crazy light? Are you thinking how lonely it still is? You will not need a coat. And I'm sure you've all done this on the beach, followed somebody's footprints. Sometimes when I go down, there's just one other set of footprints, and I'm always tempted to walk with them and inside them. This poem is called Bearings. Yours are the only footprints on the shore. I walk beside them, close to the water, sometimes treading to match your stride, sinking in, making myself at home, together in the silence of no one else. Where you curve away towards the west, I'm tempted to follow, but with the sun behind me, my shadow is always pointing north. I turn to watch where you have gone, but you are miles away, and so am I. Just really a glimpse, like the kind of thing might happen to you on a train. You might meet somebody for a short while, have a relationship, and I just feel sometimes you can have a relationship with other people's footprints. This is another one about footprints, and it's about my sister-in-law, who I often think of when I'm down on the shore. She died 3 years ago, and she's buried in a woodland site at Leamington Spa, not too far from Warwick. It's called Gone. Other footprints tread the sand where you and I would walk along this shore. Today, the sun shines on the sheltered glade you chose to be your resting place. It shines here too, although the sea is too far out and you have gone beyond the slack of the tide. In poetry, you can sometimes use a garment as a metaphor to express something that you might not want to express in any other way. Rain. By mistake, I took your hat instead of mine, the same black one we both have, with a peak and ear flaps. Yours isn't right for me. Even adjusting the strap as far as it will go. It keeps on slipping over my eyes, shutting out the sky, the horizon, the waves. All I can see is one boot following the other, sinking into the sand. But I keep on wearing it, your hat, in this incessant rain. The second part of the book is a fanciful idea, I suppose, about the idea of the sea being in love with a woman walking on the beach, a kind of affair. But the first one in this group indicates that it won't be an ordinary relationship, obviously. Far, smooth sand will stretch for more than miles beside a sea far out, huge pools reflecting summer's tallest sky on fire above the dunes. And she will be walking towards the water's edge. They will not rush across a wind-swept moor, calling each other's names. It will not be like that. So this poem is in the voice of the sea. The sea is speaking about the woman. It's also looking at the woman herself in the spring of her life, in the summer, in the autumn, and in the winter, thinking about her sexuality, and the sea looking at her in those different times of her life. And it's just called Her. In spring, I watch, not ready to entice her yet, leave shells and pebbles to decorate her castles, let her paddle in my pools. In summer, I'm more serious. I offer her my cold embrace, and she accepts, gasping when I touch her thighs, between her legs, her breasts, when I bite the back of her neck, drench her in foam. Even when it rains, she comes. In autumn, she dips her veined hands in my shallows, wades in to the backs of her knees. I smooth my waves to ripples, tempt her further in with crimson weeds to wrap around her wrists. In winter, it's no longer physical. She stares at me from the top of the dunes, stumbles down to walk beside me, casting her long shadow, sniffing my salt. I heave my highest waves towards her, goad her into coming closer. She tightens her coat, fixes her eyes on the wide dark line where I drink down the sky. And this is the sea hoping that the woman will come down to the shore today. Come, the wind has found a lover hungry for its breath. The sun has nothing better to do than shine. My waves will fling their glitter at her feet, leave necklaces of broken shells, threads of seaweed, grains of peat. And you do feel sometimes when you're walking by the sea, the bounty that the sea throws up towards you, the beautiful pebbles, the bits of shell, the seaweed. This poem is called Offering, again in the voice of the sea. I have strewn the shore for her with tangled kelp, stitched with crimson seaweed hair, scattered wet pebbles, salt grey, crystal black, rich umber, ochre, quartz, heaped up orbs of golden foam to float like lamps towards her on the slow flood of the tide. And my waves swept skywards, crest deep lace edges on purpose to embrace her. There is nothing else to offer after this, except perhaps to return that kiss. And the kiss appears in a later poem. There's also the lovely fine lines that the waves leave on the edge of the sand, the damp sand, as they retreat. And they look like writing. Message. My waves are penning long, fine lines, wavescape scribble etched in sand, love poems stretched along the shore for her to find. Mo lianan, they say, beloved one, before the words unravel in the spinning wind. I mentioned my sister-in-law in an earlier poem who died actually of Alzheimer's, which she had for 10 years and which she always dreaded. She'd said she never wanted to go through that. And for the last 3 years of her life, she was just in a sort of cot bed, just basically lying there until her heart gave out. And I have always thought that if I had that diagnosis of dementia, I would want to choose, and this would be the difficult part, of course, I would want to choose the right moment to walk into the sea. This is the sea speaking. When? And on that day, when she wades in, wearing her grey coat with the deep pockets she used to fill with shells, she will not frown, not look down at the sand under her boots. She will stare out to the horizon like she always does and wonder how it will be. But she has wondered long enough. When she drags out of her depth, I will take her then. I will take her then. The third section of the book is very short. It's just 2 poems about lovers. And the first one was inspired by a shell that I found. Not this particular shell, but one very similar. It's a whelk shell, and it's been scoured out, and it makes a ring, which looks a bit like a knuckle duster, I thought. And it inspired this poem. Ring. Oh, I should have just said it's about the nearest I get to a feminist poem in this book. Ring. Did Poseidon's mistress cast this off after a tiff, the weight of it sinking into their tangled bed, tossed up in last night's storm to lie half hidden in a cluster of kelp? This scoured shell, polished to a knuckle duster, is not a circle for the 3rd finger of my left hand. But I wear it anyway. Then cast it back into the sea, in case she has regrets, in case he asks for it, in case a knuckle duster on her finger might make all the difference. And the other poem about lovers is inspired by a bone comb. At Tai Korsava, we had a wonderful exhibition of artifacts which were taken from a wheelhouse, 5,000-year-old wheelhouse, which is on the headland, not far from where I live. In fact, I can see it from my house. And this was an absolutely brilliant exhibition of these wonderful artefacts. But I was particularly struck by a comb. It was about that big, I think, and down the centre there was this beautiful carving of minute circles. And I thought, whoever carved this, it must have taken them a long time to do it. And I assumed it was a man. I might have been wrong, but I was thinking that it would be a man and that he would be carving it possibly for his bride. Bone comb, 3000 BC. From high in the dunes, he can see her down on the shore, kneeling close to the waves, her bright hair tangled by salt winds. In his hand, he holds the bone he is carving into a comb, its narrow teeth already cut to the correct length, lacking only the decoration he has chosen. Tiny rings enclosing even tinier rings, needing all his skill. He will finish it before the hunter's moon, place it gently in her bright hair, and kneel beside her, close to the waves. I think I mentioned that the sand is sort of white, silvery sand, and in fact it's really crushed shells which give it its sparkle. But it's also a kind of graveyard for those shells. There's also, in the summer, vast quantities of the most heavenly sea rocket, which gives off this wonderful scent. Graveyard. On silver sand, wanton sea rocket scents the air, where empty whelks, cockle purses, limpet hats, thin dunlin shells, tight-lipped cowries, pecked white crabs, sharp razor shells wait for astonishing waves to crush them into silver sand, where wanton sea rocket scents the air. This poem is actually about death. I think you do have thoughts about death. I do anyway, when I walk by the sea. This is the woman speaking. Death. Forever, it says, and again, forever, and never, ever again. And day after day, it beckons me in to those slow dancing waves, splashes my face, licks my cold skin, swims below me, above me, beside me, twists its legs round me, pulls me close in to kiss, whispers the bit about less than a grain of sand in the surf, and never again, and forever. It knows about this. And now we come to the wool coat which the woman had. And a coat can be seen as something that would keep you warm, but it could also be seen as something tight and almost like a straitjacket, keeping your place where you should be, or where other people maybe think you should be. Wool coat. She finds the cast-off stitch and pulls, unravels tight-knit hems, row on row of worn grey wool, snips off all the buttons, unpicks both shoulder seams, the sleeves, loosens knotted patterns round her neck, unwinds, till all that's left are skeins of wool, long unpicked threads, light enough to fly unwound and lift into the wind. And the final poem is left for the sea, to speak in the voice of the sea. And I shouldn't have said he, it's it. The sea mentions other women that have gone and walked on the shore through the centuries. Other women. I should have spoken of other women on the shore, women who walked here dressed in the skins of seals, dragging seaweed up the beach, leaving it to dry, setting their signal fires, burning the bodies of their dead. Women whose wombs synchronized with tides, who watched repetitive waves, the swell of waxing moons, who birthed their babies in my shallows. Women who in all weathers ran down the dunes, pulled off their clothes, tall they were, short hair cut like boys, and fearless, fearless as warriors, out of their depths, breasting my waves. Women who watched for a patch of sail on the horizon, praying it was one of theirs. A woman who stood at the edge of my waves, scribbling in her notebook. And I should speak of the times before and after this, when no one came. So that's the end of the poems from the Written on the Shore book. I'd like to, it is the Warwick History Festival, I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about a few years of history on this island, in fact in the whole of the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, which has dealt with the clearances. Only recently, where I live, I live in a township which is called Grenitote, which is part of the Solace area. I was told that there was a place called Old Grenitote, not far away from where I live. It's about, I suppose, 20-minute walk, where there are just the remains of the houses where people were cleared out of their houses. They were cleared because the landlords discovered or knew that by having sheep on the land instead of the crofters, they would make more money. And so it was inconvenient to have the people there, and the people were cleared. Sometimes they were cleared to parts of the island that didn't have such good soil. Sometimes they were cleared completely off the island and went to Canada and went to Australia. There's a lot of people who come to visit the islands come from Canada and Australia because their relatives were born here. I went to Old Grenitote, walking along, went into the old houses. They're literally just almost like footprints of the houses, but you can see the outlines and very low walls. And I went in and I sat there for a while, just looking at the view that the people would have had, and trying to imagine what it would be like. And one of the interesting things for me was that on the journey there, just threading its way through in the grass, was this tiny flower which is called tormentil. It's a little yellow flower with 4 petals, which is an entwining flower. And it's called tormentil. And the derivation, the Latin derivation of the word is agony and pain. Because I should say that the people they were turned out of their houses, but it wasn't very kindly done. In fact, in many cases, it was very cruelly done, and their houses were burnt above their heads, and it was a really, really awful time. And people to this day have not forgotten. They still talk about it. So we have Old Grenetote, 1845. Ruins of houses jut above the grass where we are walking, and rocks that once were walls bear witness. This was the byre end, this the living room, and this the hearthstone where we sit and listen to its memories of people living here in peace beside this shingle shore, their houses clustered close together down below the moor, looking north to Pabay and the Harris Hills, welcoming the boat from Borarray, whose skeleton still rests here in the bay. How what they had they shared of fish, potatoes, crops, and paid their rent in ash from burning kelp to landlords who were harsh. Until eviction notices arrived to clear them out, telling them to take what they could carry on their backs and leave the very walls, roof, turf, their cultivated land, food that they had grown, the place that was their home. How the factor came on horseback with strong men, giving orders, dragging their belongings in the mud, nailing up the doors, and how the minister preached it was God's will for them to leave and emigrate to foreign lands to find a better life. How they pleaded, how they were helpless in their plight, how they were kicked aside like dogs till all the fight was gone from them. Only these stones bear witness now. Only these stones remain. And flowers of tormentil, threading their yellow petals through the grass, remind us of the agony and pain of those who had to leave their land, their way of life, their home, and will not come this way again. But the very famous thing that is remembered in the Solace area is called the Battle of Solace. And the Battle of Solace was fought by the women of Solace. The men couldn't really fight because they were the tenants of the houses, of the crofts. And because they were the tenants, it was against their law for them to fight. And if they had fought, they'd have been put in prison, and then they wouldn't have been there to support their wives. When the women knew that the men were going to arrive to turn them out, before they came, they went down to the shore and they made up heaps of shingle rocks and heaps of sea tangle, because that was all they had that they could fight with. Now, I've tried to write this poem in the voices of the women, remembering what happened. And it could be spoken by several different voices, but just for now, it's going to be my voice. But you could hear lots of different voices, each one having a line. Voices of the women remember the Battle of Solace, 1849. I remember us all going down to the shore. I remember us piling up sharp shingle rocks. I remember us heaping up thongs of sea tangle. I remember resting my face on our bed, too heavy to carry, where our son died. I remember placing my hands on the table where I stood to bake, and my mother before me, and her mother before. I remember blessing the walls to remind them our hearts belong here. I remember the warning, the black flags flying. I remember the factor arriving on horseback. I remember estate men and marching police and our men helpless against the law. I remember the shouted orders to leave, their granite faces, our frantic pleas. I remember the fight in our hearts against force. I remember our battle cry, howling like dogs. I remember pelting with sharp shingle rocks. I remember their truncheons beating and beating, being kicked and dragged by my hair to the shore. I remember them brandishing flaming torches, setting fire to the thatch with people inside. I remember house walls smashed to the ground. I remember a scream, "They murder my children!" I remember us washing our split open heads. I remember the burn running red with our blood. I remember our bed too heavy to carry. I remember the table where I stood to bake. I remember blessing the walls to remind them it's not just stones and grass. Our hearts belong here. And what about you? Will you remember? Remember to tell them how hard we fought to save this land, this place that is our home. And I'd like to finish the whole of the kind of North Uist Solace part of today before I read some of my other poems by reading a poem called On Those Days, which during the COVID situation here, although I have to say we haven't had the virus, is something that we're very thankful for. On those days, when we wake to the sun edging in, when we wake to the silence of no wind, when we amble half-moon beaches, apples in our pockets, when we sit small on headland rocks, watching the sea. On those days, if this is all there is, it is enough. I'd like to finish by reading a few poems from my selected works of poems about women. And I'd like to start by reading one about Eve. I think I always feel sorry for Eve because she had such a bad press. And I often think if there had been a few women there when the Bible was being written, maybe she wouldn't have had such a bad press. And maybe women wouldn't have been made to bear the guilt through these generations. Eve. We hadn't seen him for weeks. I'd just sprinkled incense into the hot pool, was lying there in starlight, sipping iced nectar, listening to the nightingales. He appeared out of nowhere, in complete meltdown, bellowing my name. I stood my ground, without a towel. It was only an apple, for God's sake, and I only took one bite. Get over it. He crept away, and I stepped back into the pool. It was a fundamental moment. And this is another one about Eve, which I wrote after the abortion rights were being removed from many states in America, which made me feel very angry, I have to say. It's called Genesis. Look, I'm sorry about that fucking apple. I was just newly made, had no role models, didn't think beyond the bite. And God, were we bitten, inferior, a possession, beaten into submission, when all along it should have been obvious. A sperm is not superior to an egg. and the wombs belong to us. One of the things that women are obsessed by are how they look, and in particular, how much they weigh, and they're always wanting to diet. And this is just a little bit of advice about when you have to weigh yourself. Never weigh at night, right? You lie awake thinking the diet's a mistake. Then because you can't sleep, you'll creep down to the kitchen for tea and comfort cake. Never weigh in the day, okay? But if you have to, you're at Slimmers Anonymous, say, before you hop onto the scales, remove earrings, necklace, watch, bracelet, hanky in your pocket, socks, and quickly cut your nails. Always weigh naked in the morning. Just a warning, do it before that first cup of tea and after you have been to the toilet properly. This is the lightest you are going to be. If you weigh more than you expect, forget. Move the scales until you find an uneven bit of floor and try again. Or stand on the very back edge of the scales unless you find that in your case that makes you weigh even more. As a last resort, place the scales beside the bath or next to a chest of drawers. As you step gently on the scales, rest your hand on the top of the bath or chest and press. Then slowly let the pressure off. Step off when you like. This gives the perfect weight, the best you can ever expect. And by the way, if anyone asks about your weight, look them straight in the eye and lie. The book is called Be an Angel, and it was Virginia Woolf who actually coined the idea of women being the angel in the house. I did think that it was way past its sell-by date, and hoping that things had changed a lot, and I think they have. But this poem was read on Radio 4's Poetry Please not that long ago, and I had a letter from a young woman saying, you know, how she said that it's still the same, it's still exactly the same. Anyway, this is my angel poem. Be an angel, he said. Make me a cup of tea. She made it. Be an angel, he said. Iron a shirt for me. She ironed it. Be an angel, he said. Listen to me. She listened. Be an angel, he said. Let me do the talking. Let me make decisions. Let me choose. She let him. Be an angel, he said. Make a home for me. Bear my sons for me. Always be there for me. She was always there. Be an angel, he said. Lie beneath me in the life I have made for you. She turned away, and as he watched, she folded up her wings. This next poem was written in response to an article in Pravda, where the headline said that Russian women should be proud of their bruises, as the country partially decriminalizes domestic violence from a criminal offence to a civil offence, so that the men would face fewer penalties. This poem, some of the words in this poem are taken directly from that newspaper report. It's called So. It's civil for a man to beat his wife. His offence is civil, no longer criminal. So, did it feel civil to you? And women should be proud of their bruises, show them off in low-cut, sleeveless dresses, expose their bitten breasts, remove hats, scarves, dark glasses, so everyone can see their faces. So, do you feel proud? And they believe that if he beats you, it's because he loves you. So, do you believe this? And scientific evidence confirms beaten women are more likely to give birth to boys. Violent men sire more boys, who are more violent, and have more boys who are more violent, which is seen as a valuable advantage. So, have you noticed an advantage? And battered women who stay with their men may have been selected to tolerate a certain level of non-lethal violence. Not quite lethal then, just short of lethal, almost dead. So, does not quite lethal feel comfortable to you? So, are you okay with all of this? This poem is part of my aging. I should have explained that the selected works takes you through kind of cradle to grave, and this is one of the aging poems. I started to write it. It's a poem about, and I'm sure some of you will know about this, where you go to the fridge, open the door, and you can't remember what it is you've come for. Or you walk into another room to get something, and you can't remember what it is. So I started to write this poem, and it got longer and longer and longer. And in the end, I divided it into 3 sections: Amnesia 1, Amnesia 2, and Amnesia 3. Amnesia 1. At the top of the stairs is a chair where I sit when I can't remember what I've come up to get. I know it's no use sitting there. I'll have to go back to exactly where I was when I thought about going to get whatever it is that I've forgot. Amnesia 2. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. I put shirts onto hangers, gather clothes for a wash, and take them downstairs. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. It started to rain. The windows are open. Those flowers are fading. I take them downstairs. I go upstairs to get my purse from my bag on the bedroom chair. On the bedroom chair is yesterday's paper, the unfinished crossword, 10 down, 7 letters, something M, something E. And I can't remember the words for loss of memory. Amnesia 3. I have to write everything down now, make notes in my diary, then make a note saying, look in your diary. I make lists, lists of lists, lists saying, make a list, daily organising lists. 1, bank, take out £50. 2, buy a card for Rose. 3, PO, stamps and post. I forget the list, go straight to the PO, don't know what I've come for, go back home. If I'm just going for one thing, say a Battenberg cake, I don't make a list, but that's a mistake. I see ripening peaches, fancy a few grapes, wonder if I'm out of bleach. I'm tempted by the fillet steak. Leave the shop with the carrier full, no cake. I keep pens and paper by my bed for when I can't sleep. Last night I scribbled 1 crackers. But are they for Christmas? For cheese? Or is it someone I know? I don't know. If ever I find I've written 1 get up, I'll give up. I'm going to just read the last 2 poems, which are from the end section, which is about death. So we're back to death again. I do have a whole pamphlet of poems about death. But this one, I was waiting for Robert, my husband, outside in a shopping mall. He was in the shop and I was just waiting outside, and there were people walking towards me, and I know it's not an original thought, but I just thought these people are all carrying dead people with them, the dead. They walk with you, the dead. Some skip along in front, some walk beside, some, like naughty children, drag behind. Others walk on top of you, crush you into nothing, or demand to be carried like shopping. A few slip like loose change into pockets, and one or two lie curled together, stitched into the lining of your heart. And I'd like to finish with this poem, which I'll dedicate to Robert, my husband, who died earlier this year in January. And this is the poem that I read at his funeral ceremony. And it's about the fact that when someone dies, wherever you look, there they are. It's called You. You are my grief. You are my disbelief, my darkness and my light. You are bright sunshine and the weeping rain. You are the sleeping leaves, the splash of waves. You are the vanished garden, the silent swing. You are the flight of birds, the sharp remembering. And when I light this candle and say your name, you are the candle. You are the flame. Thank you very much.